Billionaire's son. Failed every test until the new black maid taught him one. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the marble floors of the Westbrook mansion, but 12-year-old Marcus felt nothing but darkness closing in around him. Another test paper lay crumpled in his trembling hands, the red F at the top seeming to burn through the paper like a brand of shame. His father's voice echoed from the grand staircase, each word falling like a hammer blow against Marcus's already shattered confidence. "Worthless," Harrison Westbrook declared, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the floor as he descended. "Absolutely worthless. How can my son, with every advantage money can buy, fail at something as simple as reading?" Marcus didn't look up. He had learned that meeting his father's eyes during these moments only made things worse. The paper in his hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the exhaustion of trying so hard and failing every single time. The letters on the page seemed to swim before his eyes, rearranging themselves into meaningless patterns no matter how hard he tried to focus. His blonde hair, usually styled perfectly by the house staff, hung limp over his forehead, damp with the sweat of concentration that never brought results. The mansion around them stood as a monument to his father's success. 27 rooms, priceless artwork on every wall, a garage filled with cars worth more than most people's homes. Yet, in all this luxury, Marcus felt smaller than a speck of dust, invisible and unwanted, a failure in a palace built on achievement. The kitchen buzzed with whispered conversations as the staff prepared breakfast, their voices carrying through the servant corridors like wind through leaves. "Another tutor quit yesterday," Sandra, the head housekeeper, murmured while arranging fresh flowers in crystal vases. "That's the 7th one this year." The cook, Mrs. Peterson, shook her gray head sadly. "Poor child looks more defeated every day. You can see it in his eyes. He's given up believing he'll ever succeed." They fell silent when they heard footsteps approaching, but their concern lingered in the air like morning mist. Unknown to them, a woman named Grace Thompson was at that very moment walking up the long driveway, her modest suitcase in one hand, and a heart full of determination in her chest. She had answered the advertisement for a housemaid position not because she needed just any job, but because something in the description had called to her. A wealthy family, a large estate, and between the lines she had sensed a kind of desperation that reminded her of her own childhood. Grace was 34 years old, with skin the color of rich coffee and eyes that held both wisdom and kindness in equal measure. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and though her clothes were simple and well-worn, she carried herself with a dignity that money couldn't buy. As she approached the service entrance, she thought of her mother, gone now 5 years, who had taught her that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the plainest packages. Harrison Westbrook barely glanced at Grace when the head housekeeper introduced her that afternoon. To him, she was just another member of the staff, another person to keep his massive house running smoothly while he built his empire higher and higher. "She'll be handling the East Wing," Sandra explained, leading Grace through the endless hallways. "The family rooms are there, including young Master Marcus's quarters." Grace nodded, taking in every detail. The expensive paintings that seemed to judge from their frames, the thick carpets that muffled every footstep, the silence that felt heavy with unspoken disappointments. It was on her 3rd day that she first encountered Marcus properly. She was dusting the shelves in the library when she heard a sound that made her heart clench, the quiet, desperate sobbing of a child who had given up hope. Following the sound, she found him in a corner of the study, surrounded by torn workbooks and broken pencils. His shoulders shook with the effort of holding back tears, and in his lap was yet another test, this one so covered in red corrections it looked like it was bleeding. Grace set down her cleaning supplies and moved closer, her footsteps deliberately soft but not silent. She wanted him to know she was there without startling him. Marcus looked up, his green eyes red-rimmed and defensive, ready for another adult to tell him to try harder, focus more, stop being so lazy, but Grace did something no other adult had done. She sat down on the floor beside him, right there on the expensive Persian rug, and looked at the test paper with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "You know," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that Marcus hadn't heard directed at him in so long. "When I was your age, my teachers thought I was stupid, too. They told my mama I'd never amount to anything because I couldn't read the way they wanted me to." Marcus's defensive posture softened slightly, confusion replacing some of the shame in his expression. This woman, this maid, who his father would barely acknowledge existed, was telling him she had struggled too. Grace continued, picking up one of the broken pencils and examining it thoughtfully. "My mama, she was a wise woman, worked 3 jobs to keep food on our table, but she always made time to sit with me every night. She figured out something all. Those teachers missed. My brain just worked differently. The letters, they danced for me, switched places, played tricks. Sound familiar?" Marcus's eyes widened, and for the first time in months he felt something other than failure. He felt understood. "The letters. They move," he whispered, as if speaking this secret too loudly might make it worse. "Sometimes a B becomes AED. Sometimes whole words flip backwards. Everyone says I'm not trying hard enough, but I am. I try so hard my head hurts." Grace nodded, her expression serious and validating. "I believe you. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with your brain. It's not broken or stupid or worthless. It just needs a different key to unlock all that brilliance inside." The next few weeks brought a change so subtle that at first no one noticed except Marcus himself. Grace would arrive early for her shift, and before anyone else was awake, she would meet him in the study. Instead of starting with books, she started with something unexpected: movement. "Words are just symbols," she explained, having him trace letters in the air with his whole arm. "Your brain needs to feel them, not just see them." She taught him to use colored overlays on his reading materials. Something her mother had discovered helped calm the dancing letters. She showed him how to break words into smaller chunks, using his fingers to cover parts of the page so his eyes could focus on just a few letters at a time. Some mornings were harder than others. There were days when Marcus threw his pencil across the room in frustration, when tears of anger and shame would bubble up despite Grace's patient encouragement. But she never gave up, never showed disappointment, never made him feel like he was wasting her time. "Every mountain looks impossible from the bottom," she would say, her mother's words flowing through her like a river of wisdom. "But every step you take makes you stronger, even the steps that feel like you're going backwards." She shared stories of her own struggles, how she had failed 4th grade twice before her mother discovered her learning difference, how she had gone on to graduate high school and even taken college courses while working to support her family after her mother got sick. These stories weren't meant to minimize his struggles, but to show him that struggle didn't mean defeat. Harrison Westbrook began to notice something different about his son, though he couldn't quite place what it was. Marcus no longer slumped. At the dinner table, no longer flinched when asked about school. There was something in his posture, a tiny spark of something Harrison had never seen before: hope. When he questioned the household staff, trying to understand what had changed, they all shrugged, equally puzzled. It was Mrs. Peterson who finally mentioned, almost in passing, "Well, he does spend a lot of time with that new maid, Grace. See them in the study most mornings before the house wakes up." Harrison's first instinct was anger. How dare a maid presume to involve herself with his son's education? He had paid thousands upon thousands of dollars for the best tutors, specialists from prestigious universities, child psychologists with impressive degrees. What could a housemaid possibly offer that they couldn't? But something held him back from storming in and putting an end to it. Perhaps it was the way Marcus had actually smiled at breakfast that morning, or how he had voluntarily picked up a book the previous evening instead of being forced to study. So Harrison did something he rarely did. He watched and waited. From his office, he could see into the study through a crack in the door. He watched Grace and Marcus working together, saw the patience in her movements, the encouragement in Her smile, the way she celebrated small victories with genuine joy. He watched his son's face light up when he successfully read a sentence, saw him high-five Grace with an enthusiasm Harrison had never inspired in his child. The breakthrough came on a Thursday morning that started like any other. Marcus was working through a reading passage about dolphins, using all the techniques Grace had taught him. The blue overlay sheet was in place, his finger moving steadily under each word, his lips forming the sounds carefully but confidently. Suddenly, he stopped, his eyes widening. "Grace," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "I just read that whole paragraph, the whole thing, without stopping, without the letters jumping around. I understood every word." Grace's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. "You did it, Marcus. You absolutely did it. But here's the secret. You were always capable of this. We just had to find your way of learning." Marcus jumped up from his chair and did something that surprised them both. He hugged Grace tightly like she was a life preserver and he had been drowning. "Thank you," he whispered against her shoulder. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Neither of them noticed Harrison standing in the doorway, watching this scene with an expression of shock and something else. Perhaps regret, perhaps recognition of his own failures as a father. He cleared his throat, causing both Grace and Marcus to jump apart, Grace immediately stepping back into a professional posture, worried she had overstepped her boundaries. But Harrison's eyes were on his son, seeing him truly for perhaps the first time. "Marcus," he said slowly, "would you read that paragraph for me?" Marcus's confidence wavered for a moment, the familiar fear of disappointing his father creeping back in. But Grace gave him the tiniest nod, a reminder of all they had worked on, all he had accomplished. He picked up the paper, placed the blue overlay back in position, and began to read. His voice was clear and steady, only stumbling once on a particularly long word, but recovering quickly. When he finished, the silence in the room was deafening. Harrison stood frozen, his usual mask of cold efficiency cracking to reveal something raw underneath. "How?" he finally asked, the word coming out rougher than intended. Grace stepped forward slightly, her voice respectful but firm. "He has dyslexia, Mr. Westbrook. It's not a deficiency or a failure. It's just a different way of processing information. Some of the most brilliant minds in history have had it. With the right tools and techniques, there's nothing Marcus can't learn." Harrison sank into a chair, his legs suddenly unable to support the weight of his realization. All those times he had called his son worthless. All the appointments with specialists who had focused on what was wrong rather than finding what was right. All the moments of frustration when money couldn't buy the solution he wanted. "I've been a fool," he said quietly, more to himself than to them. Marcus took a tentative step toward his father, the test paper still clutched in his hand. "I got a B+ on my spelling test yesterday," he offered, hope and fear battling in his voice. "Mrs. Mitchell said it was the most improvement she's ever seen from a student." Harrison looked up at his son, really looked at him, and for the first time saw not a disappointment or a problem to be fixed, but a brave child who had been fighting a battle alone, believing himself broken when he was simply different. "I'm proud of you," Harrison said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue but necessary, so necessary. "And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for not understanding, for not being the father you needed." The apology hung in the air like a bridge, being built between them, fragile but with the potential for strength. Grace quietly began to gather the study materials, preparing to leave father and son to this moment, but Harrison's voice stopped her. "Miss Thompson, Grace, please stay." She turned back, uncertain. Harrison stood, his business posture returning but somehow softer. "I would like to offer you a different position, not as housemaid, but as Marcus's tutor. Full-time, with a salary that reflects the value of what you've given my son, what you've given our family." Grace's eyes widened, but before she could respond, Marcus grabbed her hand. "Please say yes," he begged. "You're the only one who understands. You're the only one who makes the words stop dancing." Grace looked between father and son, seeing in both of them a need that went beyond academics. They needed healing, connection, and someone to bridge the gap that Harrison's perfectionism and Marcus's struggles had created. "I accept," Grace said simply, "but on one condition. Mr. Westbrook, you attend some of our sessions. Marcus needs to know that you understand his challenges, that you're part of his support team, not another obstacle to overcome." Harrison nodded, immediately surprising everyone, including himself. "Whatever it takes, whatever my son needs." And so began a new chapter in the Westbrook mansion. Grace moved from the servant quarters to a suite near Marcus's room, her official title now educational specialist, though Marcus just called her his learning coach. The study sessions continued, but now they sometimes included Harrison, who struggled with his own learning curve: how to be patient, how to celebrate small victories, how to see his son's different way of thinking as a gift rather than a curse. Other changes rippled through the household. The staff whispered, but now with admiration rather than pity. "Did you see Marcus's report card? Almost all B's and even an A in creative writing," Sandra would say proudly, as if Marcus were her own grandson. Mrs. Peterson started making special brain-healthy snacks for study time, researching foods that helped with focus and concentration. The house that had once echoed with disappointment now hummed with possibility. Marcus's room transformed from a place of hidden failures to a showcase of achievements. Not just improved test scores, but creative stories he wrote, art projects, where his different way of seeing the world became an advantage, science experiments that his curious mind devised. 6 months after Grace first sat on that study floor with Marcus, the school called Harrison with news that would have seemed impossible. Before, Marcus had been selected for the gifted and talented program, specifically for his innovative thinking and creative problem-solving abilities. "His teacher says he sees connections others miss," the principal explained. "Once we understood how he learns best, we realized we weren't dealing with a struggling student, but with a brilliant mind that just needed the right approach." Harrison stood in his office, phone in hand, tears streaming down his face for the first time in 20 years. Through the window he could see Marcus and Grace in the garden, working on a biology project. Marcus was animated, explaining something with wild hand gestures while Grace listened with that patient smile that had changed everything. That evening at dinner, a new tradition had formed. Marcus would read aloud from a book of his choosing. Sometimes struggling with words, sometimes flying through passages with confidence, but always supported. Grace would sit beside him, occasionally helping with a particularly tricky word. Harrison would listen from his place at the head of the table, having learned that sometimes the best thing a father could do was simply be present and proud. "You know what I want to be when I grow up," Marcus announced one evening, setting down his book. Harrison leaned forward, expecting to hear doctor, lawyer, business executive, the careers he had once imagined for his son. "I want to be a teacher," Marcus said firmly, "like Grace. I want to help kids who learn differently, show them they're not broken." Grace's eyes misted over, and she reached over to squeeze Marcus's shoulder. "You'll be an amazing teacher," she said softly. "You understand the struggle, and that's what makes the best teachers, those who remember what it's like to fight for understanding." Harrison found himself nodding, a smile spreading across his face. "Whatever you choose to be, son, you'll be excellent at it. You've already taught me more than any business deal ever could." He paused, then added, "You've taught me that success isn't about never falling. It's about finding the right person to help you learn how to get back up." As the months turned into years, the story of Marcus Westbrook became something of a legend at his school. The boy who had failed every test, who had been labeled as hopeless, graduated as valedictorian of his class. In his graduation speech, he stood at the podium, no longer the small defeated child hiding in the corner of the study. "They say it takes a village to raise a child," he began, his voice clear and confident. "But sometimes it just takes one person who refuses to give up on you. One person who sees past your struggles to your potential. For me, that person was Grace Thompson, who came into our home as a maid, but became my teacher, my mentor, and part of my family." In the audience, Grace sat between Harrison and his wife, tears streaming down her face as Marcus continued. "She taught me that Billionaire's son failed every test until the new black maid taught him one wasn't a story of shame, but a story of transformation. A story that proves that the most valuable lessons can't be bought. They have to be earned, through patience, understanding, and love." The applause was thunderous, but Grace barely heard it. She was thinking of her mother, of those long nights struggling over homework at their kitchen table, of the woman who had refused to let the world label her daughter as less than. She had passed on that gift to Marcus, and now he would pass it on to others. The cycle of understanding and compassion would continue, rippling outward like stones thrown in still water. After the ceremony, as families gathered for pictures and celebrations, Marcus found Grace standing alone by the school's garden, looking at the sunset. "You know," he said, standing beside her, "I never asked you why you really came to work for us. You could have gotten a job anywhere, done anything. Why a maid position at our house?" Grace smiled, the same warm smile that had first given him hope. "My mother always told me that God puts us where we're needed most. When I saw that job posting, something told me there was a child in that big house who needed what I had to give. I just followed that feeling." Marcus nodded, understanding flowing between them without need for more words. In the distance, Harrison was talking to other parents, but his eyes kept finding his son and Grace, the unlikely pair who had taught him that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or deals, but in the connections we make and the lives we change. Years later, when Marcus opened his own learning center for children with dyslexia and other learning differences, Grace was there for the ribbon cutting. Her hair had more gray in it, and Harrison's had gone completely silver, but the bond between them remained strong. The center was named the Thompson Method, after Grace's mother, the woman who had started it all with nothing but love and determination. On the wall of the main classroom hung a framed quote that Grace's mother had once cross-stitched on a pillow. "Every child is gifted. They just unwrap their packages at different times and in different ways." Below it was a photo. A young Marcus struggling over a book, with Grace beside him, patient and encouraging. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful education doesn't come from expensive tutors or elite schools, but from someone who understands struggle, who offers patience instead of pressure, and who sees potential where others see only problems. The story of the billionaire's son who failed every test until a maid taught him, one became more than just their story. It became a testament to the power of believing in someone when they've stopped believing in themselves. It proved that true teachers come in all forms, that wisdom doesn't require wealth, and that sometimes the person who changes your life is the one you'd least expect. Marcus never forgot the lesson Grace taught him that went beyond reading and writing. She taught him that everyone has value, that struggle doesn't mean failure, and that the greatest gift you can give someone is the belief that they are capable of more than they imagine. As he watched children enter his learning center, each carrying their own burden of failure and self-doubt, he would think of that scared 12-year-old boy he had been, and of the woman who had seen past his failures to find his future. And in those moments, he would whisper a prayer of gratitude for Grace Thompson, the maid who had polished not just the silver in their mansion, but the tarnished self-worth of a boy who had believed he was worthless. She had taught him the most important lesson of all, that every person has a gift waiting to be discovered, and sometimes all it takes is one person with patience and love to help them find it. The title of his story, Billionaire's Son Failed Every Test Until the New Black Maid Taught Him One, became not a mark of shame but a badge of honor, a reminder that transformation is possible when someone believes in you enough to show you how to believe in yourself. In the end, the Westbrook Mansion stood not as a monument to Harrison's business success, but as a place where a miracle had happened, where a child's life was changed by a woman who understood that the greatest wealth isn't what you have, but what you give. Grace had given Marcus more than reading skills. She had given him hope, confidence, and the knowledge that he was worthy of love and success just as he was. And that gift, more precious than all the money in Harrison's bank accounts, would ripple forward through every life Marcus touched, every child he helped, every family he gave hope to. Because Grace had taught him that education isn't about forcing everyone to learn the same way. It's about finding each person's unique path to understanding and walking beside them until they can run on their own.